Thomas Hale was 33, weathered, wiry, and thin from a year that yielded nothing but dust and disappointment. He awoke that night, not from the cold, though the chill cut through the cabin walls, but because the night itself had altered. There was something in the air, a breath, a shift, wrong. It wasn't the wind. Without speaking, he drew on his long coat over a frayed shirt, his boots scuffing softly across the pine floor. His lantern was out, so he went by the ghostly trail of moonlight, each nail and footprint outside shining with frost like they'd been handled by ghosts. Near the barn, his wagon stood still and white, snow-covered and quiet as a grave. And then he heard it, a noise so faint, so odd, it hardly rose above the quiet of the night. A baby, or perhaps two. Thomas stiffened. His heart refused to accept it. Lately, since Mabel had died, loneliness had a way of tricking him. Whispers on the wind, shapes that coalesced out of memories. But this was not memory. He walked toward the wagon, boots breaking through frozen earth. The wood groaned under his weight as he reached it and pushed aside the canvas. She was there, crouched in the straw as if something feral and hurt. A girl, perhaps around her mid-20s, but the harsh years had taken most of the youth from her face. Her dress was also torn at the hem. She had rosy cheeks from the cold, and dark matted hair tumbled down over her shoulder. In her arms, two babies, twins. One suckled greedily under the collar of her blouse. The other cried, swathed tight under a frayed blanket. She looked up at him, blue or gray eyes, hard to tell by the moon, but steady, unafraid, dazed, quiet. Thomas didn't speak. He blinked once, then stepped back like he'd seen a ghost he didn't dare name. At dawn, he came back. Not a word, not a question. He deposited a flask of fresh water and a makeshift quilt at the wagon and headed to the barn. Feeds the mule, repairs a latch, as if he hadn't discovered a stranger woman and her children asleep in the bed of his wagon. By noon, she's disappeared. By evening, she's returned. This time, she remained just outside his porch, standing in the snow, bare feet, one baby in her arms and the other tied to her back. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She simply waited until he opened the door. "They ain't fed right," she told him, words hardly more than breath. "And I ain't got enough in me." He stepped aside. She sat beside the fire inside, cross-legged, rocking the babies softly. Thomas didn't say a word, simply set down a pot of milk and stale cornbread between them and returned to his whittling. "They're both girls," she said finally. "Ain't named 'em. Didn't know if names would matter, if they wouldn't survive." Thomas glanced up. "They look like fighters." She gave the smallest sound, maybe a laugh, maybe a scoff. "Fighters, maybe saints. Doubt it. I'm Thomas," he offered. "Claire." That was it. That night they ate in silence, slow spoonfuls between them. One of the babies cooed for the first time. Claire smiled, but not with her eyes. Those stayed locked, like doors bolted from the inside. He gestured toward the cot. "It's clean." "I won't take your bed." "Her husband's. She's dead. 2 winters now." Claire looked at the flames. "Same with mine." "Your husband?" She nodded. "Sense, pride, luck, all of it." Later in the evening, with the girls asleep and Claire's head finally resting against the cabin wall, Thomas added another log to the fire and went outside. The moon was high. The wind had died down. He stood there, gazing out toward the black horizon, toward the wagon, and then at his own calloused hands. They seemed useless now, vacant, as if they could not prevent the darkness Claire brought with her. She hadn't departed by morning. She had swept the embers, folded the cot, scrubbed the hearth. One of the babies slept in her shawl. The other clutched a cracked hand mirror, his wife's, hidden in a drawer Claire must have discovered. "I'll be on my way," she said quietly, eyes fixed to the floor. "You got somewhere to be?" She hesitated. "Not exactly." "Then stay, at least until they're stronger." She looked up, unsure. Thomas shrugged. "Barn roof leaks. Someone's got to nag me to fix it." She didn't smile, but her mouth softened. As the thaw started, gentle drips from the eaves, mud where the snow had been. Claire remained. She coaxed the fire, fed chickens under the barn with a baby on her hip, moved like a person accustomed to getting small. Thomas never asked what she was fleeing. He didn't need to. The manner in which she winced when the dog growled, the way she stood stock still when boots landed on the porch. Her history was inscribed in each unspoken response. You don't have to recount some stories. Those tell in scars. Thomas came back from town one evening with an oat sack and a tin box. He set it down quietly next to her on the table. Sewing kit. Claire stood over it for a long time before opening the box. Blue threads, soft blues, white lace, 2 needles, a thimble. "I ain't the one that's broken," she said low. "I didn't say you were." He put down the box. She hemmed the baby blankets by lamplight that night, careful stitches, as if a prayer she dared not speak out loud. Thomas sat at the distant stool, hat over hand, and for the first time in months, when he eventually closed his eyes, he did not dream of loss or illness. 3 days after that, Claire returned from the well, shoulders frozen. "There was a man," she said, "by the ridge. Didn't say anything, just looked." Thomas laid down his spade. "You know him?" She nodded slowly. "He would call me his, tell me I was lucky, tell me I should have smiled more." Thomas breathed out, then nodded. "He's not welcome." Claire turned away, eyes blinking. "He won't like being denied." "Don't matter." She didn't thank him, but her fingers shook when she took the baby from him, hugging her tight. She sat closer to the fire that night. When she finally went to bed, she didn't sleep. Eyes open, listening. Thomas didn't sleep either. By morning, frost had come back to the windows, the earth silent once more. But within, the fire burned steady, and between the shared silence and wakeful breath, 2 strangers had ceased to be strangers. They hadn't become something else yet, but the wagon was no longer vacant, and neither were they. Thomas did not ever yell, but Claire still jumped on occasion, when the door banged shut in the wind or when his boot knocked a stool over. He saw but did not speak. He was accustomed to silence. Since Mabel's death, the stillness in his house had become a pain. Every groan from the floorboards sounded like a reminder of what was lost. Claire's silence was not like that, however. It did not resonate. It lingered, like a figure standing on a sheet of ice, too afraid to move her weight in case the entire world shattered beneath her. They ate at the same table, but sat as strangers in waiting on the same stagecoach most days. Claire would hold one baby in her lap, and the other, softly bundled into a basket at her side. Spoons clinked quietly against ceramic bowls, and it was between those clinks that silence spoke the loudest. Thomas would observe her when she did not notice, how her gaze swept corners of rooms, taking in space, weighing options. Her tiredness was not keen. It had been muted by years of unobtrusive hurt, not the kind that shatters in an instant, but the kind that grinds you down grain by grain. He started leaving little offerings rather than posing questions. a restored handle on her basket, a burnished comb laid unobtrusively across the mantel. He sewed together a second blanket from fragments of his deceased wife's skirts one day. Claire folded it and laid it out under the twins without remark. One afternoon, while Thomas chopped kindling near the porch, he spotted Mrs. Dorcas Pike waddling up the hill in her fur-trimmed cloak and crooked bonnet. Her boots were tight, and her expression was tighter. "I heard you got company," she called out, voice pinched and curious. "A woman, with twins, they say." Thomas leaned on his axe. "She's resting. It's cold out." Dorcas's eyes sparkled. She could smell scandal poised on the tip of someone's tongue. "Well, it's strange is all. Stranger with 2 babies, no wedding ring, pallid in your barn like some stray animal. Folks talk." "Let 'em," Thomas growled. Dorcas sniffed again. "Town's small. Rumor travels quicker than snowmelt." He didn't dispute it. He didn't have to. That night, Claire discovered a withered rose trodden on the porch railing, its petals flattened by the tip of a boot too small to belong to Thomas. She gazed at it for a long time, then swept it into her apron and said nothing. During supper, she finally spoke in the silence. "You got a church in this town?" Thomas raised an eyebrow, taken aback. "2. Methodist and Baptist. Don't go either." She sat up the stew. "I did when I was a child, before my pa sold our pew for liquor." He didn't know what to reply. He just took a cautious drink of water. Claire leaned her head to one side in the firelight, looking at him. "You say less than most men I've known." "I only speak what's worth being said." "And if there's nothing worth saying?" "Then I just listen." One of the infants gurgled, then released a little whimper. Claire hoisted her with the practiced skill of a mother who's done it on her own, on wagons in fields under stars, with no assistance but love and instinct. Thomas observed her, not lustfully, but quietly. Reverence, perhaps. As a woman pulling bread from next to nothing, as collecting snow in her apron to boil for laundry. Simple and sacred at the same time. Later, cleaning out the hen house, Thomas couldn't help but think of names. The girls still had none. Claire referred to them as little one or darling, but never permanence. That evening, seated by the fire, he asked, "Ever think of names?" Claire was mending a rip in one of the swaddles. She didn't even glance up. "I did. They seemed too real. To name something is to make it real, to make it easier to lose." Thomas allowed the silence to lie there. "My wife wanted a boy named Eli, after her uncle." Claire's needle hung suspended. "She wanted a girl, too," he put in. "Told me if it was a girl, she'd name her June, like the month, friendly, gentle, slow to anger." Claire regarded him, actually looked, without fright, without strategy, with something gentler, compassion, or at least the beginnings of it. "They're not his," she blurted. Thomas blinked. "Whose?" "Not his. They're not his. He courted me, promised land, promised peace. When I said I was pregnant, he said he'd raise them, if I knew how to behave." Thomas's jaw tightened. "And if you didn't?" Her lip shook. "Then I wasn't worth keeping." He nodded slowly. "So you left?" "I didn't want my girls growing up thinking pain was love." The quiet between them lengthened, not uncomfortable, just truthful, the sort that leaves space for hurt without attempting to heal it. Claire rose, went to the cradle. She pressed a gentle kiss to each child's forehead and murmured something Thomas couldn't catch. Then she turned back and said, "The little one, she kicks like a mule. Perhaps she's the fighter." I believe she may be Hope." Claire nodded her head. "The other one waits, sees everything. She's quieter, but not softer. She's Grace." Something landed in Thomas's chest, a weight he hadn't known he was bearing since the night the wagon rocked in moonlight. The following morning, Claire discovered a tin of buttermilk biscuits on the ground next to the woodpile. She blinked at it, then looked up towards the barn where Thomas was securing a new plank onto the roof. "You didn't have to," she yelled. He glanced down. "Didn't say I did. Thought you might like something soft for breakfast." She grinned. Just a ghost of it, and took the tin in. Days stacked upon days. Snow fell once more, heavier this time, piling on the ridge and holding them captive in a world that seemed half remembered. Claire sang soft songs to the girls. Thomas repaired the chicken wire without being asked. She swept his porch. He carried in additional kindling. Small gestures, quiet harmony. Peace is a delicate thing. One evening, Claire found a boot print near the woods, half melted but deeper than Thomas's tread. She said nothing at first, just showed him. He nodded. "I'll put a lamp out near the barn." "He won't like that," she whispered. "I don't care." They didn't speak further, but that night Thomas sat up longer than usual, sharpening his old axe by lantern light. Claire peeked through the curtain once. His shoulders were slumped, his face calm, not angry, but resolved. The kind of man who doesn't shout, just stands. The babies stirred in their sleep. Claire whispered to them, "You're safe here." And maybe, for the first time, she believed it. Outside, wind whined down the ridge like a minister without a flock. But within, the silence among the spoons had changed, had become something else, something holy, something warm enough to ride out the cold. That cold crept close to dusk. The light grew honey-colored. The snow on the ridge glowed like ash dusted over heaven's porch. Thomas had just entered, having chopped kindling, his back red and raw, his sleeves powdered with pine bark. Claire waited inside, rocking the twins by the fire, her shawl pulled tight, braid loosed down her back. They said very little that day. The silence had softened, less jagged, no longer born of fear, but of understanding, like the stillness after last hymn. And then came the knock. 3 sharp raps, deliberate, not the tap of a neighbor, not the clumsy knock of a stranger. It sounded like a claim. Thomas stopped. Claire's fingers closed hard around Hope. Her chest constricted. She recognized that knock. She'd heard it on doors, on windows, once on the hood of a wagon. "Wait here," Thomas whispered. He opened the door cautiously, blocking the wind from the room. The man on the porch had stepped out of a colder world. Coat fringed with sable, boots buffed, face smooth-shaven, rigid with arrogance. "Evening," the man replied, voice heavy with self-assurance. "You Thomas Hale?" "I am." The stranger slowly removed his glove, as if time was his to command. "Name's Elias Wren," he continued. "I think you got something that belongs to me." Thomas did not shift. "I don't think I do," Elias laughed, a smooth, practiced sound. "Miss Claire Mayborn and her babes. She's mine. Stole off with what wasn't hers to steal." By then Claire had risen. She stood behind the hearth, arms wrapped tight around her daughters, spine braced like a tree mid-storm. Her eyes weren't pleading. They were scanning, sharp, alert, already measuring exits. "She's not yours," Thomas said calmly. "She was promised," Elias answered, voice thick with entitlement. "Half her dowry's still in my book. My land's got a room with her name on it. You may be feeding her now, Hale, but I fed her kin for a year solid. This is unfinished business. I'm not unfinished, Claire said, moving into the firelight. Elias's eyes narrowed. You look worse than I thought. Expected you'd slink back by now. I've got more sense than I had then, she replied. Her voice quivered, but she didn't glance away. I know what type of man raises his hand and what a woman should never listen to when it does. Thomas moved into the room. You've had your say. You're not wanted here? Elias grinned, smug and confident. You expect to keep her hidden. Town knows. Gossip travels faster than horses. You'll be the thief of another man's bride. She never was. Elias moved closer, his tone low and oily. You're making a mistake, Hale. You bring her in, you bring her shame along. That mark doesn't wash off easy. I can make this official. Sheriff Buckley owes me. She'll be pulled out and tried for theft if I speak the word. Thomas's fist clenched, but he didn't hit. He gazed at Claire, and Claire, shaking still, clinging to her daughters like shields, finally found her voice. They aren't his, she bellowed loud enough for the wind to carry it away. He told me one time they'd end up in a ditch dead if I didn't learn to be good. Told me I should be lucky to have a man like him. Her voice broke, but she didn't hesitate. I stayed too long because I was afraid. But I won't be silent now. Elias's jaw clenched. You accusing me of lying? I'm accusing you of being a man who confuses control with love. Elias took a step back, made another laugh, this one louder and harsher for effect. You'll be sorry, both of you. I'll be back by week's end, documents in hand. You can't hold what don't belong to you. Without another word, he turned, boots crunching through the snow like nails into a coffin lid. The wind slammed the door behind him. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then Thomas turned to Claire, his voice soft. You're not his, he said, as if reminding her. I know, she whispered, but it's different hearing someone else say it. The child stirred, feeling her mother's heart beat faster. Grace whined. Claire cradled her daughter, kissing her forehead. Thomas put down his axe beside the fire pit, then added some more wood to the flames. You'll have to decide if you wish to remain during what's to come. Claire wrapped her daughters in her arms. If I go away, I teach them to flee. If I remain, I teach them to remain standing. He nodded. That was sufficient. The following morning, Claire folded her shawl with delicate hands. She bathed the girls, fed them, then went outside into the frost to hang linens from the porch rail, head high, back straight. At midday, Mrs. Pike rode by with 2 bags of flour and a look of disapproval. Your guest has a history, she said to Thomas. Trouble don't knock for nothing. She has a name, Thomas said. That night, Claire sat beside the fire, stitching names into the borders of the swaddling clothes, each stitch tiny and deliberate. Her hands worked with a silent purpose, and Thomas sat and watched in his rocker. You choosing to name them now? He asked. She didn't look up. I'm tired of waiting for permission to love things. The fire cracked softly. Then she asked, What's your middle name? He blinked. Matthew, after my father. Thomas Matthew Hale, she repeated, as if tasting it. A name like that sounds like steadiness. He shrugged. Not much to be proud of. It is to me, she told him. I don't require a sheriff to inform me that I'm valuable, but I would like very much to know that someone else thinks so. Thomas regarded her as a man who's discovered water in the desert, slowly, cautiously, in fear that it might disappear. I believe it, he said, even when you don't. Outside, snow fell in sweeping spirals, soft and quiet as a hymn. Inside, Grace shifted again. Claire got up to rock her, humming an ancient song, silent and true. The name Elias Wren carried no gravity here anymore. It was part of the cold, part of the world outside, a world which would never possess Claire again. Within, the cradle creaked, the flames dwelled low, and the letters sewn onto cotton had at last a place to rest. But the wind grew bitter once more, colder than in weeks. The aroma of scorched cedar and far-off snow entered through the walls. Thomas awoke before dawn to the dying breath of the fire. Claire was already at the window, shrouded in nightdress, arms hugging her body, eyes on the ridge. "He's coming," she said in a flat voice. Thomas didn't question how she knew. Some men carry fear before them like a shadow that always gets there first. The day passed slowly, tense. Claire cleaned what wasn't in need of cleaning, rocked the girls to bed too early. Thomas kept himself busy repairing a fence that wasn't broken. Neither of them spoke of the man, but both were waiting to hear him. Just at dusk, hoofbeats shattered the silence. Elias had returned, his coat finer than before, atop a horse black as coal. Beside him rode Sheriff Buckley, his face sunken, worn and weary with favors owed. Behind them trailed a wagon, hitched with leather, empty, waiting. Thomas stepped out to the porch before they dismounted. "Evening, Sheriff," he said. "Mr. Hale," Buckley nodded, removing his gloves. "I'm here out of courtesy. There's legal business to address." "That so?" Elias got off his horse, brushing snow from his sleeves. "Brought the papers just as I promised. She's mine, by promise, arrangement. Them girls, she was in the family way when she came to me. Got signed statements from her brother and kin stating as much." Thomas didn't blink. Statements from people who stood around and did nothing don't carry much weight here. The sheriff cleared his throat, unfolding the papers. "It says here Mr. Wren provided for her family for 18 months, purchased a marriage license, paid bond for a homestead. She ran." "There's reasons for that," Thomas said. Buckley's voice cooled. "Not my concern unless charges are filed. But if you're harboring a woman promised in good standing, and if those children are his—" "They're not," Claire said, stepping out from behind the door. Claire emerged from the doorway, her braid pulled tightly, her dress plain but crisp. She had hope slung across her hip, grace wrapped against her belly. Her eyes were clear. The sheriff doffed his hat. "Miss Mayborn?" "I have no right to Elias Wren," Claire cut in. "No vow was made, no promise broken, save the promises I had to break to preserve my life and theirs." Elias snorted loudly and bitterly. "This is the girl you defend, Hale? She's a liar, damaged goods. She'll ruin your reputation in this town." Thomas got down from the porch, slowly, meeting his gaze. "You don't speak to her like that? Not here? Not again?" Elias sneered. "You think you're some kind of hero? A cold widower playing father to bastards that ain't yours?" The word hit like a slap. Claire flinched, instinctively rocking the girls and whispering softly. Sheriff Buckley looked away, uncomfortable. "You're not taking him," Thomas said. "You'll have to go through me." Elias stepped forward, snarling, "Gladly." His punch landed hard, snapping Thomas's head sideways and sending him stumbling into the snow. Claire cried out, spinning to shield the girls. Thomas tasted blood. He wiped his mouth on his sleeve, then stood up straight. He did not strike back. "That's the difference between us," he said softly. "You throw your hand up and call it strength. I remain still and call it love." Elias moved once more, but this time the sheriff intervened. "That's enough, Wren." "What?" Buckley held up a hand. I've heard enough. This isn't law anymore. It's pride. And I won't be the man who assists in pulling a mother and her daughters from the first place they felt safe." Elias's voice turned cold. "You're aligning yourself with a woman who doesn't know her place?" "I'm siding with someone trying to build something good," Buckley replied. "You're trying to win a fight she already walked away from." The snow was falling harder now, silencing the world. Elias looked between them, Thomas, Claire, the sheriff, and for the first time he seemed to realize he'd lost control. He turned toward his horse, jaw tight. Before mounting, he spat into the snow. "You'll regret this." Claire stepped forward, just enough. "I don't regret choosing my daughters," she said, "and I won't regret choosing the man who never asked for anything but gave us everything." Elias didn't reply. He yanked the reins and disappeared into the falling dusk. The sheriff lingered a moment longer. "Check in next week," he said to Thomas, "just to keep things clean." Thomas nodded. "Thank you." "I didn't do it for you," the sheriff said. "I did it because I've got daughters, too." Then he tipped his hat to Claire and rode off behind the man he no longer served. The cabin was warmer that evening than it had been in weeks. Thomas sat with an ice pack applied to his jaw. Claire massaged salve into his bruised knuckles, though he'd never raised a hand. She didn't say a word until the girls were asleep. "I was scared," she whispered. "I kept thinking all day he'd somehow twist something, find a way to get in, and maybe he still will, but it was nice to stand firm." Thomas nodded. "You didn't stand. You spoke." She smiled weakly. "I didn't even cry." "You don't have to," he told her. "You've already made it through the toughest part." She shifted toward him. "What's that?" "Believing you deserve peace." She smoothed a strand of hair back from her brow. "It still feels like a borrowed coat, like something I'll be asked to return." "You won't." Thomas got up and went to the shelf over the fireplace. He came back with a small wooden box. A pair of lovingly faded baby booties and a piece of ribbon were inside. "These belong to my wife," he told us. "She made them when we lost our first. I couldn't throw them away, so I kept them. But I suppose they were meant for someone else's children." Claire's hand shook as she accepted the box. She did not weep. She merely nodded, lips clamped shut, awed. Later that evening, after the flames had reduced to embers and the snow had rendered the yard a field of white ash, Thomas stepped onto the porch. There, suspended from the eaves, were a pair of antlers he'd mounted the first spring following Mabel's death. They'd always seemed fragile to him, symbols of something once wild, now quiet. Tonight, though, they seemed different, guarding, root-like, ancient, and watching over a home reborn. He went back inside. Claire was swaying the twins, her gentle, wordless motions. She didn't glance up, but she must have sensed he was standing there because she started to sing. Not a lullaby, but a hymn, steady, unshaken. Thomas stood in the door, waiting. Whatever tempest came next, they would not ride it alone. In the subsequent days, the creek by the orchard started to whisper once more. Birds reappeared in wary twos, probing branches with wary feet. Winter had not departed, but it had mellowed. Within there was a rhythm Claire had thought she would never know. She made new linens each morning. The girls smiled with familiarity, reaching for the cuff of Thomas's flannel with plump fingers and unerring trust. He picked them up tenderly, held them close. A man who knew what loss cost and never took this presence for granted. Claire had claimed its small spaces as her own, a sewn pouch on the mantel, a comb with lost teeth next to the basin. Her shawl now hung from a hook, not folded neatly like armor, but draped like it was meant to. She no longer looked back over her shoulder at night, no longer double-checked the latch. She had remained. That was the miracle. But it was her decision that made it sacred. One night, Thomas arrived with something wrapped in a cloth. Claire had been humming as she pinned baby dresses on the line. The hum had followed him like a memory. "I want to show you something," he said hesitantly. She turned, smearing her hands clean on her apron. He unwrapped the bundle gently, a carved bit of oak, dark, rich, polished. Across the front, one word, "Hail," and underneath it, two smaller names, Hope and Grace. Claire's breath hitched. Her fingers went to her chest as if anchoring her heart. "I thought they should have a space here," Thomas said. "Not only in the cradle, in name." She moved closer, touched the plaque softly. "No one's ever inscribed anything for me," she breathed. "It's long past time." Outside, the lantern wavered, then steadied, throwing golden light across the porch. 2 days afterward, the sheriff came back with a report. Elias Wren had jumped state lines. He was sought for fraud, debts owed and uncollected, and threats to 2 other women. The law no longer cared about his allegations. He would not be back. Claire sat in silence, her jaw clenched, her arms crossed. After the sheriff had gone, she merely said, "Good." She then took her daughters outside into the sunlight without keeping an eye on the tree line. The burden that fell from her shoulders wasn't visible, but it altered the way she moved. She no longer walked like someone poised to run. She walked like someone who at last was home. "Well then," Thomas said, voice firm, "I reckon I better ask." He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. His words floated in the silence between them, low, solemn, more truthful than any wedding vow. "Will you remain? Not because you're safe, not because you must, but because you want to. Because you choose to create with me, not born from rescue, but from choice." Claire didn't reply with words. She moved toward him instead, forehead to forehead, her eyes closed. When her lips brushed against his, it wasn't furious or flamboyant. It was soft, deliberate, earnest, the type of kiss that's shared by individuals who've learned to value quiet and intend it. They wed 2 mornings afterward under a sycamore tree on the bluff. No entourage, no wedding veil, only Mrs. Pike and her pesky cat. Claire wore her mother's old brooch and Thomas's deceased wife's shoes. The twins were tucked into a quilt she'd made herself. Mrs. Pike spoke a few words, voice shaking with age and something akin to awe. The vows, however, were not spoken. They were in glances and breath, in the look Claire gave Thomas, like she didn't have to fear being seen any more. That evening, after the children had gone to bed and the embers were low, Thomas lit the porch lantern once more. Claire stood beside him, leaning on his shoulder. The flame did not waver, not even with the wind. "I used to believe," Claire breathed, "that I was the sort of woman men simply endured. Too quiet, too damaged, too much." "You were never too much," Thomas whispered. "You were simply waiting for someone who didn't make you shrink." She shut her eyes. "I don't feel borrowed anymore." "You're not," he told her. "You're home." Inside, the cradle softly creaked once and came to rest once more. The cabin had the scent of pine and the scent of lavender soap. The wooden walls no longer echoed. They contained, and far away from the hills, where the ghosts walked silent paths, a man named Elias Wren slipped out of the tale, not with thunder, not with revenge, but with obsolescence. By spring, Claire had put herbs by the porch. Hope slowly crawled. Grace first said the word mama while stretching for Claire's braid. Thomas constructed a fence, not to keep things out, but to keep what was important in. Yes, hard days still came. Yes, memories still sneaked up sometimes unbidden, but they didn't own the story anymore. They were merely pages turned. Claire sang to her daughters now with their names. No more nicknames, no more maybes, because nothing in her life was uncertain anymore. And every evening, as she walked by the porch light and noticed its warm glow, she said a quiet thank you, not for protection, but for love. Not the desperate sort, but the sort constructed over time, from two hearts that had shattered in disparate winters and somehow found their way back to one another in spring. And sometimes that's the most sacred kind of miracle,